All right. Hello, everyone. So this video right here is going to go over just the basics of computer audio, if you couldn't tell by the words on the screen. So again, I'm going to focus on, just a real quick overview of just what sound is in general, uh, and then what makes it unique in the world of computers, because computers are different than human ears. If I just blew your mind, take a second to pause the video, and then jump back in. Um, okay, so that's going to be there. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the more common types of microphones and how they work, because we have to get the audio into the computer somehow, and we use microphones for that. So let's just jump right in. So, again, talking very briefly, sound is just vibrations of airwaves. Something, in this case, my voice, or maybe your speakers or headphones or the car backfiring down the street, whatever, it's making some kind of noise. And essentially, that means it is vibrating. These vibrations cause the thing that is vibrating, whether it be, again, my vocal cords, the car, the whatever, to push against the air molecules that are right next to it. This causes them to bunch up, and then they bounce off of each other and hit the air molecules next to them, which then cause those to bunch up and bounce off like so, causing this to form air waves of high and low pressure. You can see that, again, this happens much faster in real life, but with these red ones, you can kind of see that the molecules themselves are not moving very far, but they're all bunching up and spreading out. That is what forms sound that we can hear, these waves of high pressure hitting our eardrums, and then it stimulates nerves and we hear it. Again, that's the really, really basic overview. Um, we can represent this with a waveform diagram. So essentially, if this is air, whenever the pressure is high, it's higher on the waveform. Whenever it's low, it's lower. Again, that's what this curvy line represents. This is basically the most common way that audio is represented on the computer, just so you know. Okay, I just real briefly describe how that works, but I'm not gonna read through it all, but here's how human ears vaguely work. Um, I realize now my me is in the way, so let me just hide my there, so you can pause this and read it if you want. There we go. That's how that works. If I jump over here, I'll bring my me back. There we go. Here's a diagram. So again, sound waves travel in through the ear. They eventually vibrate against this membrane. They get traveled into the cochlea, this snail-looking guy, and then they're just little, essentially hairs that pick up the vibrations, and then they stimulate different nerves, which is why we can hear different levels of sound and different pitches and things like that. Again, real brief overview. I just wanted to remind people of some of this, but it's not the focus of the video. Okay, so we're jumping from there directly into microphones for a very specific reason, and that is that a microphone is essentially an electronic ear. I've got one right over here, and I just pulled this one up because it's one of my ones that aren't currently plugged in or in a storage bin. If I can just get it off of the stand, that would be great. So as I'm doing this, basically, the microphone picks up the incoming vibrations from the air and converts them into a small continuous stream of electricity. This varies. I'm giving up trying to take this off the stand. It doesn't want to do it. I need a better grip on the things. But anyways, this electricity doesn't necessarily need to go into a computer. In fact, in a lot of live setups, they may not even use a computer to handle the audio. It may just go right through the mixer and the like. But essentially, this electricity represents the sound. As the air pressure is higher, the voltage coming out of the microphone is higher, and so on. So the electricity looks like this. If you were to graph the voltages as we go. So again, you have your microphones, and then there's usually some kind of grill here. And as the sound enters that, there's a little spot inside where all this conversion happens. The same thing with this one I'm using here and I'm talking into. It's just a different shape, a different kind of microphone. I am going to talk about the dynamic and condenser microphones. They're probably the most common ones that you will run into, at least on a regular basis. A dynamic microphone, generally speaking, they are very durable and the most common out there. You'll see them a lot in live musical settings because they're, while not impossible, they are fairly difficult to break, and you don't require any extra electricity in order to make it work. The way it works is that as I talk, the air pushes a little membrane, essentially, and this membrane is connected to a bunch of wires that are wrapped around a magnet. This causes the wires to move around a magnet, and if you're familiar with how electromagnetism works, that generates an electric current. I'm not going to go into the specifics of that because that's a whole other presentation's worth of material, but basically it causes a very small amount of electricity to be generated, which then gets sent out the wire from the back of the microphone. In this case, on this microphone, it would be just, I don't have the wire connected, but it would plug in right there, and it goes to, in this case, the computer. But you can record the electricity, you can change it and manipulate it. It kind of depends. This is a diagram here, so I'm almost 100% certain that everyone who has seen this presentation will have seen a microphone that at least looks like this. And this is probably the most common, nice quality dynamic microphone you can use. This diagram just kind of illustrates what is happening. So if these are the airwaves, it hits this little membrane. It causes them to push back and forth, making these wires move around the magnet. And then it sends the electricity out the wires, and then that goes to whatever the microphone is plugged into. A condenser microphone is a little different. So they're a little more delicate than dynamic microphones, but you can still get pretty sturdy ones. But the main thing is that they need extra electricity in order to work. You may notice a lot of things you can plug microphones into may say phantom power or 48 volts. This again just means that it gives the microphone the extra electricity it needs to work. These are used a lot for vocal and instrumental recordings because they're very accurate and have nice responses to different frequencies. The way they work, this one here is a condenser microphone. So is this one, but it's plugged in, so I didn't bring it over. The one I have here is a dynamic microphone. But the way they work is that there's essentially two pieces of metal. One has a current of electricity running through it. When the vibrations enter the microphone, it essentially pushes the two plates closer together, and that causes variances in the electrical current, which then gets sent out the microphone cable. Again, that's a very, very simplified version of what's going on, but that's basically it. Again, there's some stuff going on right here, but we don't need to jump into that. But you can see that the plates move closer together. There's electricity running through it, and as it gets closer together, more electricity can jump through the circuit, causing more voltage and so on. And again, here is a type of condenser microphone. You can see right here in this part where my mouse is, that is where that happens. All right, so all of these processes happen in the capsule of the microphone, which is a relatively small area right there. The rest of that is usually, maybe it's a counterbalance to make sure, microphones don't fall or weigh, or it's something to hold on to. It's very helpful, and high quality microphones feel heavier, partly because of the electronics, partly because they put a slug in to help balance that weight, so that way your microphones don't do that. That's a problem. When I teach this course, I'm aware that accidents can happen, so I just tell them try not to, bump my microphones into things, but microphones are expensive if you've ever had to look into buying some good ones. So whenever I teach a course that uses them, if a student does a mic drop, they fail, and I'm not sorry about that. because they are expensive. But you generally can take the protector off the capsule on certain microphones. You can get a look at it, but that's where all of the electrical conversion happens. Okay, so I'm going to skip the computer for now and talk about the speakers, the end portion, just because they function very similarly to dynamic microphones. A loudspeaker right here, it's essentially a dynamic microphone in reverse. Electricity gets sent to wires wrapped around a magnet, and the changes in electricity cause the wires to move around. That's all connected to a membrane. Sometimes the magnet's connected, sometimes the wires, it varies. But it just causes the membrane to move back and forth, and it then pushes the air next to the speaker, and then that travels until you hear it. And that's essentially how a speaker works. That's essentially it. They're very simple mechanisms in that regard. All right. The last thing is, again, mentioned that microphones have a little capsule area where they're picking up the electricity. These respond best in certain conditions. And essentially, you want to point the microphone at whatever you are recording. Let's say this is my microphone. This particular one I can actually change where it's responding to, but you're generally talking to the front of it here. So if I was to talk into the side or the back, I might not get picked up very well. So generally it's the front. Sometimes it's, the top side, goes along the long bit here, or it's on the side of the microphone like that. The easiest way I can show this off is that I'm talking directly and very closely into the front response end of my microphone. As I move back over here behind the microphone, I'm pretty sure you can still hear me, but it's very quiet, and it's probably a little just badly recorded, because that's not the side of the microphone that records any sound. This is the side of the microphone that records the sound. You'll sometimes see on the microphones a diagram that looks like this or this, and this just kind of tells you how it responds to the sound. So if the center right here is the microphone right here, it's going to pick up around the front more accurately at better levels. But as this line moves farther away, that's the further away it can pick up sound. So the back of the microphone doesn't pick up sounds, which kind of makes sense because that's the back of the microphone. There's nothing there to do it. To pick up the sounds, it picks it up better in the front. So that's that. Most microphones are a cardioid pattern, which is this one here. But you can get some that do omnidirectional, so it'll pick it up from all sides. There's a bicardioid, so it looks like two versions of this for the front and back. It can vary. Does this one? This one does. So hopefully you can see it. I'm going to bring up this microphone as my spare that I have plugged in. And you can see that you can actually, on this one as well, you can change the pattern just by, that's a hard knob to turn, changing that knob. And you can see there's the cardioid right there, kind of second from the end. There's the double cardioid, the omnidirectional, stuff like that. You can change how it's responding to sound. So yeah, that's essentially that part right there. Just basically, microphones have a business end. You want to point that at what you're recording. Whether or not you're super close or far away depends on what you're recording and the microphone you are using. Okay. Now that I've gotten through all of that in about 15 minutes, let's actually talk about the bulk of this video, computer audio. So computers use numbers. That should not be new information, but if it is, again, pause the video until your mind is no longer blown and then jump back in. So I mentioned that microphones send a stream of electricity out the cable that they're connected to. That's great, but computers can't work with that. It needs to be a number. And this is when it's all the numbers and it's not just, different floating values. That's what's called a digital signal. Most computers have a circuit board either built in or you can connect to it that handles this kind of conversion called the analog to digital converter. You may also hear them, they're called sound cards, audio interfaces, all that's kind of interchangeable. But essentially, you plug it into the computer and it takes the signal from the microphone and converts it into a number. The way it does this is that it very quickly essentially takes a small snapshot of that incoming electricity and it says, oh, it's at 5 or it's at whatever the electricity voltage is, and it saves that in the computer's memory as a number. And then these numbers, again, it's just a very long string of numbers, and they can be played back and changed and altered in order to recreate that sound in the computer. That's essentially it. How fast these snapshots happen? Well, first of all, it's very fast, but it's called the sample rate. The rate that the computer takes a sample of that electricity. If you've ever listened to a CD, which, the little disc things, they're still around, but they are becoming less and less common. The standard rate for that is 44,100 times every second. So again, this is very quickly. If you have high definition audio, that can happen as fast as 48,000. In super high def stuff, it can go as, up to twice that at 96,000 times per second. But that's a little less common just because the more samples you have, the bigger audio the files are, and that can become harder to work with and harder to manage. But that is becoming less and less of a problem just with improvements to computer storage and processing capabilities. Okay, so I've talked about how fast the samples happen, but what actually are the samples? So when the computer takes that sample, because it's a computer, it deals with numbers, there's a finite number of possible values that it can assign to that voltage. And essentially, the more potential options it has, the more accurate the recording can be to the original sound. This is called the bit depth, and it's similar in concept to the pixel resolution of an image. So if you have something in 144p versus 4K Ultra HD stuff, because the 4K has more pixels to work with, it's a more high definition option than the 144 pixel thing there. So having a higher bit depth means that the audio can have higher definition. The standard is 18 bits, but again, high def can go as high as 24 or 32 bits. Having low bit depth, again, that can make your audio sound distorted or choppy. So you want to have decent bit depth. So this diagram here is an example of that process. So the way it works, this red line would be an incoming voltage from a microphone. Every blue dot is a sample. Okay, so again, the voltage increases and decreases over time. And again, that is analogous to the air pressure from whatever sound the microphone is recording. These samples that the computer is making may not always line up perfectly with the wave here, as you can see. But the computer is essentially assigning the sample to the closest value, the closest bit that it can to get, an as accurate of a representation as possible of the sound. So having more bits reduces the times when these samples are off from the waves. But just like having more samples increases the file size, having a larger bit depth also increases the file size. So there's a kind of sweet spot that, again, is right around the 44,100 times per second at 16-bit depths, where it's high quality but not over incumbent in size. That's kind of the sweet spot, but you can play around with that depending on what you need. Okay. So that's how we get audio into a computer. Once it's in the computer, we've just saved the audio sample as a series of numbers. And that's it. It's just a list of numbers in the computer memory. These numbers can be saved so you can play it. So whenever you play a recording, that's what's happening. It's the computer is playing through these numbers. You can change them, manipulate them, copy them, do whatever you need, and go on for whatever you need. So effect pedals, if you've ever played guitar or seen how that works, they have circuitry that distorts and changes the electricity and changes the sound. Computers have algorithms that do the same thing to the numbers. So you can apply digital reverbs and delays and distortions and all that just by changing the numbers from what they originally were when you recorded the sound. So that's how we can alter the sound in our computer programs, just by changing the numbers. To play back the sounds and hear them, we have what's called a digital to analog converter. A lot of times these are in the same circuit board as the analog to digital converter that we plug the microphones into. Again, if you have an audio interface or an external sound card, the same thing, different names, you can usually plug microphones into it and then plug speakers into the other side as well. And that essentially just takes the numbers and converts it into that stream of electricity that operates the speakers. And I talked about speakers a little while ago. And that's essentially it. If it gets more complex, yes, but on the base level, that's what happens. We make noise, the microphone picks it up, the sound card will convert the electricity into a number. We can do whatever we want to do to that number within the computer, and then we turn it back into electricity to play it out of our speakers or headphones. And that's again, that is it on the base level. If you want to know more about this, more of the computer science or the algorithm stuff, I highly recommend checking out those resources online, but that is above the scope of this video and what we do in this class. So that's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions, as always, drop those in the comments. I love answering questions when they come around. But again, that's all. So I'm just going to